from the Word. Welcome to those of you that are joining us online as well. We are glad that you are with us this morning. So we wrapped up a series last week, and then I decided to take a look at what series am I going to do before Advent, and I thought, none, because Advent starts in 2 weeks. So this is a standalone. Standalone messages are so weird now. I used to only do them, and now I don't know how to do them. So I don't know. But I want to bring to you a very, very important subject this morning, and that is the very, very important subject of peanut allergies. Yeah. Peanut allergies. Very, very important. All right, so I want to begin with an illustration about peanut allergies. Maybe we'll say it that way. So peanut allergies in the United States used to be rare until the mid-1990s. Any old people here that had no idea what a peanut allergy was until the mid-1990s? Nobody wants to raise their hand for saying, yes, I'm an old person, but I remember when peanuts didn't kill people. I'm old enough to remember that. Oh, those were the days. The good old days, right? All right, so, but in the mid-1990s, something began to happen, and we began to see a rise in deadly peanut allergies. One study found that in the mid-1990s, that 4 out of 1,000 children, or only 4 out of 1,000 children under the age of 8 had such an allergy. That was mid-1990s, but by 2008, what did I say, numbers, people? 4 out of 1,000. Yeah. All right, 4 out of 1,000 in the mid-1990s. By 2008, according to the same survey, same people conducting it, using the same measures, the rate had more than tripled to 14 out of 1,000. Scary indeed. So the response was pretty obvious. Everybody, we need to protect one another, protect your loved ones, especially protect your infants from peanuts. Peanuts are killers, and we need to be protected from peanuts. Besides, it might be a little inconvenient, but after all, what's the harm? Really, what is the harm? Well, it turns out that the harm in protecting our children from peanuts is pretty severe. It was later discovered that peanut allergies were surging, can you guess? Precisely because parents and teachers had started protecting children from exposure to peanuts back in the 1990s. This is not just a health alert. I'm going somewhere with this, all right? So did you catch that? So peanut allergies were on the rise. They continue to rise. I mean, they're killing everyone, these peanuts, right? And other nuts as well, which someone pointed out, peanuts actually a legume, but that's not really our point here this morning. So they discovered that it was precisely because parents and teachers were protecting children from exposure to peanuts that caused peanut allergies to rise. Another study by LEAP, L-E-A-P, learning early about peanut allergies. How about that? Is that better? All right. If you are, those online probably heard it, unfortunately, because they had the mic right here. Their mic is right here. I can't go over all the peanut stuff again. I just can't do it. If you missed all the peanut facts, we'll have to have a small group or something. We'll have to get together at some other time. This mic should only affect those in the room and what, of course, we upload to the webpage. All right. So LEAP, learning early about peanut allergies. I guess LEAP sounded better than LEPA. They discovered that the regular eating of peanut-containing products, when started during infancy, would elicit a protective immune response instead of an allergic immune response. Did you catch that? We got scared of peanuts, and we started depriving children of peanuts, and that actually caused peanut allergies to go on the rise because our immune system, or a baby's or an infant's immune system, didn't know how to respond, right? Let me just read this from the the researchers. The researchers recruited the parents of 640 infants from 4 to 11 months old who were at high risk for developing a peanut allergy because they had severe eczema or had tested positive for some other allergy at an early age. The researchers told half the parents to follow the standard advice for high-risk kids, which was to avoid all peanuts and peanut products. Never made me hungrier for a peanut. The other half, yeah, I mean it, yeah. The other half were given a supply of a snack made from peanut butter. I think it was a light dusting of peanut butter and puffed corn, and were told to give some to their children at least 3 times a week. So 640 infants, we split them in half. We deprive half of them, those poor souls, we deprive them of peanuts. And the other half, the parents were instructed to give a peanut product 3 times a week. Researchers followed the families carefully. That's probably a good idea. Followed the families carefully. And when the children turned 5 years old, they were tested for an allergic reaction to peanuts. All right, so I'm not a good numbers person, so maybe if you're like me, listen closely, because it misses the whole point. You had to endure all these peanut facts if you missed this point, all right? So they tested them at 5. Among the children who had been protected from peanuts, I'll let you kind of fill in a number. Make your guess. 17% had developed a peanut allergy, all right? So they'd been protected from peanuts. In the group that had been deliberately exposed to peanut products, only 3% developed a peanut allergy. As one of the researchers said in an interview, listen to this, for decades, allergists have been recommending that young infants avoid consuming allergenic foods such as peanuts to prevent food allergies. Our findings suggest that this advice was incorrect and may have, I'll add, it did, contribute to the rise of peanut and other food allergies. Are you following me so far? We try to protect them from the peanuts become a problem. If we expose them to that thing we were most afraid of, they're more likely to develop strength, and their immune system is more likely to protect them from the peanuts. I didn't jot this down in my notes, but let me just say, as an adult, if you have a peanut allergy, don't hear this sermon. I hope all the mics are working now. Don't hear this sermon and say, hey man, the pastor said I should go eat peanuts despite my peanut allergy. I did not say that. If you're an adult with a peanut allergy, it's done. It's set in stone. Don't go home and eat peanuts after this. If you are home, stay away from the peanuts if you have a peanut allergy. I'm not undoing that this morning. What I am suggesting is that how we treat infants, toddlers, young people has an impact on their lives. Our immune system is able to adapt to a changing environment and requires exposure. We've all become experts at this now after COVID, right? To a range of foods, bacteria, and even parasitic worms. I guess I was exposed to that. I don't know. That sounds horrifying. I'm glad my parents didn't say, now's the time we're going to work on your immune system's response to parasitic worms. I'm not suggesting giving those to infants. In order to develop its ability to mount an immune response to real threats while ignoring non-threats, such as peanut proteins. Vaccines work on the same logic. You give the child traditional vaccines. You give the child a little bit of the thing that the vaccine protects against, and the body learns how to fight against that thing. All right. So the idea here is that if we take upon ourselves the mindset that we're frail, we're weak, we're easily broken, life is a nightmare, there's danger around every corner, we will live a different kind of life. And friends, the reality and what we've learned from the scriptures from Pastor Chris and Peanuts is that you may, in fact, become weaker when you're not tested. If your immune system isn't tested, you become weaker. More examples on that in just a moment. Are you with me here so far this morning? So we've taught our children that failures, insults, and maybe adults have bought into this too, and painful experience will do lasting and harmful damage to them that will last the rest of their lives. And how many of you have noticed it's a little tough in life to avoid all hardships, all tragedies, all tests, all difficulties? In fact, it appears as though if we try to escape the real world and hide from every conceivable danger, it does in fact make us weaker. I know we might be thinking to ourselves, hey man, I was before all this peanut business. I must be amazing. Well, I mean, maybe. Your mom probably thinks that, but you might be. But the idea is not just that may have been exposed to this or exposed to that, or maybe we've been hardened against this difficulty. But how does the future look for us? I'm certainly not looking for difficulty. I'm not looking for tests. I'm not looking for hardships or problems. I'm looking to skate through. Thought I'd get an amen or something, right? Like I'm not looking to make life any harder. How many of you know that I have a way of making it harder despite the fact that I am not trying to make it harder? But the truth is that human beings actually need physical and mental challenges and stressors, or we deteriorate and we become weaker. And another example is our muscles and joints. Gravity pulls on us if we're lethargic, if we lay around too much, that can cause problems for us. Our muscles weaken, our muscles experience atrophy, our joints lose range of motion, heart and lung function decline, and blood clots form. I thought after last week we were going to get happy again. I thought with all the stuff we talked about last week, I thought we were going to talk about happy things. And now I'm sharing this with a room full of people who are seated. Should we stretch? Should we stretch a little bit? Should we try to move a little bit? Maybe later. Without the challenges imposed by gravity, you know this, astronauts develop muscle weakness and joint degeneration. All right? So tough things in life make us tougher. They make us better equipped to handle the tests and the challenges that are ahead. If you've been in church ever in your life, you probably know where this is going. But I love this idea. So think about something like fine china or a teacup. I almost brought one up here and shattered it on the floor. But right, if we knock the teacup off the counter and it hits the tile floor, what usually happens, what always happens to the teacup, right? Shatters, right? Because it is, how would you define its characteristics, its properties? Delicate, fragile. It's fragile, easily damaged. I'll let you preach in your own mind there for just a minute. How do you view yourself? Fragile? How do you view the generations that follow you? Every generation thinks that the generation that follows them is weaker than them. I don't know if that's true, but I know a lot of people think that. All right, so fragile. So when little Zion gets ready for a sippy cup, it's usually not made of fine china. It's not. All right, what is it? Plastic, right? Never seen a sippy cup, right? Like if you had this brilliant idea to go into the sippy cup china business, you need to rethink that. You need to really rethink that. Why? How many times does that sippy cup fall on the ground and bounce all over the kitchen before finally finding its final place there on your floor underneath something that you no doubt can't get to because you haven't been moving and you've lost that range of motion, right? So we would say that sippy cup is resilient, right? So we're so fragile and resilient. I don't know about you, But I want to be resilient as opposed to fragile. I got a couple yeahs, got a head nod. I'll take it. All right? Well, here's the thing. Let's see if I got through all my stuff here. All right. So it's not too bad to be resilient, but a gentleman by the name, let's see if I got his name, Nassim Taleb, came up with this idea. He said, we don't want to be fragile. Like, nobody wants to be fragile. Resilience better. Like, we want to be resilient. That's pretty good. But he looked at a number of things. We've talked about some of them this morning. The immune system, muscles, children, and adults as well. There are some things that he noted that if it's resilient, it only is resistant to damage. But what if there was something what if there was this sippy cup? Now, if you have this idea, this is a good idea. This is a winner right here. What if the vessel, when it drops to the ground, not only is not damaged, but what if it got stronger? What if it got better every time there was an impact? What if it got stronger and was somehow improved every time it encountered hardship or a trial or a test or difficulty? And so Taleb said, we don't really have a word for that. We see it, immune system, muscles, humans. We see things that become stronger when they're tested, but we don't have a word. So he came up with a word, anti-fragile. I might have spent a little more time on that and come up with a different word. I don't know. But I heard about this idea of anti-fragility several years ago. So we've got three things we're talking about this morning. We've got fragile. We don't want that. We've got resilient. It's better. But what if, and there are, and this is true, and I want you to see this, and I want you to begin to recognize this, that you are more than just resilient. You're not just taking the blows and taking the hits and taking the damage and ceasing to be hurt by it, but that the damage and the hits and the blows may actually be making you better and stronger and tougher. All right, I have pictures, but we don't have time to show these pictures, I don't think. They don't want to see silly pictures. All right. You know what you do, for real? That sounded, all right, I guess. Okay, so let's look at fragile. All right, if you know the Sword of Damocles, it's been a while, I didn't look it up. Sword of Damocles, that the sword, the razor-sharp sword, is over your head constantly. It's held, I believe it's by a thin thread or a hair, and it won't take anything at all for the thread or the hair to break, and there's going to be some damage that occurs. This is not biblical. This isn't the Bible. This is, stories from, what's my word? Maybe mythology is the word. I'll go with a myth. So this is not a biblical idea. Don't look up the Sword of Damocles in the Bible. You won't find it. But fragile has been compared to the Sword of Damocles. All right. So then let's look at resilient. All right. You recognize this fiery bird? Either you know the fiery bird. You don't know the Sword of Damocles, but you know the fiery bird. What's his name? He's not in the Bible either. All right. Just a myth from ancient. I don't know where he comes from. But you know the phoenix, that he's injured and then he rises back up. Like we want like the phoenix, right? That's a powerful image. And if we take Taleb's new word that he invented a few years ago, anti-fragile, there's another myth that we can look for. I don't know if you recognize this. It looked so much better on my phone than it does giant like that. Do you know what this is? Hydra, right? The Hydra. What happens to the Hydra? This mythical beast, this isn't in the Bible either. This mythical beast, you cut off one head, two grow back. Right? Like the phoenix would be cut off one head grows back. The Hydra, cut off one head, two grow back. I know this is a dopey mythical example. Somebody has just turned off the feed online because they said this guy's teaching some weird stuff. I never said this was in the Bible, but it does beautifully illustrate anti-fragility. The idea is in scriptures. Like we can find this idea, and we're going to look at this idea in scripture. There's your pictures. All right, you asked for it. I was going to skip them. Friends Many things in life are actually anti-fragile. You are designed to be anti-fragile. You can survive attacks. You can survive hardships, trials, and dare I say, tests. Some people say, what's the difference between a trial and a test? We have the imagery in mind that a trial is just something that happens and we're going through it and God allows it in our life. But a test, that's God, it can be God initiated. Can you go back to last week with all the death you talked about last week? I like that more because I was there was a buffer. I was sort of isolated from that. But God actually will put us through tests. I've never once prayed, God, please put me to a test. Things are going too easy. It would be I'm not telling you how to be God. It would be a great idea if you would test me. Let's see how much I can take. I've never once prayed that, right? Not looking for it. But we know that God does, in fact, test us. There's times and seasons in our lives where he says, it's time to grow up a little bit here. Time to mature. You got to toughen up some. And so God instigated. He will put us through some tests. Somebody said this. I don't know where this came from exactly, but someone said, a wind extinguishes a candle, but it energizes a fire. Wind will blow out a candle. But if it's a full-on raging fire, wind only feeds that fire. The author went on to say, be a fire and pray for a strong wind, right? The winds and the storms of life can make us stronger. All right, here's the idea, that we are actually anti-fragile, that God designed us that way. He contributes to that, and he may bring along testing in our lives to help to grow us up. But there's reasons for that. These are challenging times that we lived in, but guess what? It's okay because you're designed for challenging times. That you showed up on the planet just in time for the challenging times in which we live. We want to take a look at the scriptures here this morning and get off the Greek or whatever mythology that we were on before. Good illustration, but we can't leave it there. We have to look at some scripture here. I want to give you some background here. Many of you are familiar with the story of David and Goliath. I'm not going to tell that story. I'm going to tell part of that story. That's the story you tell kids. The little guy, the 16-year-old or the young man, the teenager beat the giant. That's a great story, and it's a great story for adults as well. But I remember going back over some of those stories as I got older, and I went, there's so much more detail here that they did not tell us about in Sunday school. Like that beating the giant part is interesting, but what led up to that is fascinating to me. So here's the story. If you don't know the story, Israel is out in the field, and they're being challenged by their enemies, the Philistines. And there was a common practice in the day. We see it a little bit, and that's what's happening here, but we know historically that something that would take place is that armies would say, there's no reason for all this bloodshed. Like, why should thousands and thousands of people die? Why don't we just pick one champion? We'll just pick one like you take your best guy, and we'll have your best guy fight our best guy. And then, however days. And at some point, the Philistines say, hey, how about we do this champion idea? And Israel says, that's a great idea. That's a good idea. And Saul, the king, was taller than everybody else. Maybe he didn't think it was such a good idea. I don't know. But they agreed to it. And then the Philistines are like, hey, Goliath, you can stand up now, right? They had a giant on their side. And then Israel went, oh, brother. We did not see that coming. Before we entered into the agreement to settle this with just like one-on-one, we didn't realize they had Goliath backstage. So now they're like, all right, we're picking our champion. Hang on, give us a minute. And days go by. And Goliath would come out, and he would insult Israel. He would insult Israel's God. And they were overwhelmed with fear. So then David, scholars think he's about 16 years old at this time, something like that. He comes out. He's not even in the battle. He's at home, and Dad says, hey, why don't you go and see how the battle's going, see how things are going. Haven't heard from your older brothers in a while. Take them some food, take them some snacks. And so David brings his brother some food. There's some funny things that happen there, too. They're like, you just came out to watch the battle. You're just wasting our time, and you just are curious, and you're not like a real man. Like, we're here to fight, and you came out just to check things out. While they're quivering and shaking in fear from Goliath. So David is not even old enough to go and fight. He just goes to supply his brother some food, kind of see what's going on, give Dad a report. He's insulted as a result of that. And David says, hey, what's going to happen? What will Saul do? What will the king do for the person that goes out and defeats Goliath? And word gets back to Saul that David's asking questions like, can you imagine? He wasn't even big enough to be thought of, to be recruited to go into battle in the first place. He's just a young man, probably a teenager. They didn't even think enough of him to invite him to the battle. And he's like, what will the king do to the person that defeats Goliath? You think that made people like David more? I think that made the soldiers like him even more. So let's take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 31. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. So now the king is calling for the 16-year-old. All right? Verse 32. David said to Saul, I love David so much. He's just so great. I just love his attitude. There's so many things I love about David. By far, one of my favorite Bible characters. Easily one of my favorite Bible characters. So the 16-year-old says to the king of the nation, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. The guts, the audacity, the boldness of this little kid. He's not really a little kid, but 16-year-old may have been, a 16-year-old then was maybe different than a 16-year-old today, but still, he's a young man. And David's like, oh, don't worry, king, I'll take care of it for you. And Saul replied, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been a fighting man from his youth. David says, I'll take care of it, boss. Saul says, this is too much for you, can't handle it. But David said in verse 34, but David said to King Saul, your servant, referring to himself, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep, right? I should have mentioned that. What was David's job as a young man? He was a shepherd. He watched his father's sheep. Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. I can just hear Saul's brain right there. Like, oh no, here we go. He's going to say something about being a shepherd equates to killing giants or something. Like I can just hear his mind like kind of tuning David out. Like there's no way anything that you experienced out in the field with the sheep has uniquely qualified you to be a giant slayer. However, David goes on to say, when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. I wonder how he said it. You know, when it turned on me, you know, I just grabbed its hair and I hit it. Or if he's like, dude, check this out. So then it turned on me, and then I grabbed its hair, and I was scared, and I just whacked it, and it died. Or if he was like, just another day out in the pasture, King Saul, right? I love to hear David's tone, like how he said, all right. Your servant, he goes on to say, verse 36, you know, we could do this all day. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And I love this. This uncircumcised Philistine, referring to, he doesn't have a covenant with God. He doesn't have a relationship with God. He's a godless Philistine. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. All right, verse 37. The Lord, or Yahweh, who delivered me from the paw of the lion. David recognized that it was supernatural, that God did this. God worked through him. The God who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Like he's convinced. All right, I'm sold. Right? Verse 38. Then, and we could skip this, but I just think this is amazing in the context of this whole story. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic, right? Remember, David's a young man or a boy, and Saul is the tallest guy around. So Saul's a tall fellow. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. Verse 39, David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them, and they were too big. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. I love David, but one of the things that I don't like is how different from me David is. I'd be like, this is too big and clunky, but at least it's something. You're like, I'll wear it. I'll suffer with not being used to this equipment and this armor. And you probably know the rest of the story. If you don't, we don't have time to go into it in great detail, but you probably know that David went out and did in fact defeat Goliath. Now, when you heard that story in Sunday school, some of you heard it later in life, but when you heard that story, you thought, wow, how did David know? Like, what brought him to that place? Why did he have such courage? Why did he have such faith? I used to wonder that. I used to hear stories like that when I was little and think, how did they get there? Like, they're just like, it was almost like, hey, listen to these people. They're so much better than you. Like, they trusted God, and look at the crazy, wild things that they did, stuff that you would never dream of doing because they're just better than you. Admittedly, David is better than me. However, he didn't just show up and like Superman, David goes into a phone booth and comes out a giant killer. I know, stick to the notes, Petty, stick to the notes. He didn't just show up and say, let's kill some giants, man. He had some experience. He recognized that God had delivered him. He said, God had delivered me from the paw of the lion. He just reacted, right? That was money. That was a long grounding from Dad. If you lose too many sheep to the lions, right, you get in trouble for that. Dad's not too happy about that. He reacted, and God delivered him from the lion. He said that God delivered me from the paw of the bear. David had some experiences prior to Goliath. He didn't just show up and, the Spirit of the Lord overtook him and then he just wailed on a giant at a young age. By the way, I'm not sure how much his age has to do with it. I don't know how big you have to be before a rock from one of these slingshots doesn't knock you over. Like Goliath's big. There's still a giant rock in your forehead, right? That's still a big deal. So young man or not, David brought it, man. David brought the heat. don't even know what that means, but it sounded right when I said it. But he didn't just show up. It didn't just happen. He'd had some experience.
Yes.
He'd had some experience with the lion and with the bear. And those experiences that he had endured before had brought him to the place where when all of the armies of Israel were quaking in fear, there was a 16-year-old boy that think about David having slain a lion and a bear with his bare hands. And then he looks at Goliath and goes, well, he's tall, but he's uglier than the lion and the bear. He's a human, but he's still dumb, and he's an uncircumcised Philistine. He doesn't have a relationship with God, and I do.
Yes.
When you think about David and how he looked at Goliath in the context of having slain the lion and the bear in the past, I don't want to take anything away from David's accomplishment. I don't want to take anything away from the story of David and Goliath. But if you just take that story isolated, it's a way bigger deal than if you look at the background and you go, I could see how David would have the courage to do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's still not fun. Like, it's still not, home playing video games, David, but it's not as terrifying as it would be if you just showed up and there was Goliath. Like, I think I can take him. I think I can take him. I'm not going to have this armor either. It's just going to impede my movement. And so God did indeed work with David, and David slew Goliath. Again, I don't want to take from his accomplishment. It still required some faith for David. It still required some trust. But he said, the Lord delivered me. He knew who delivered him from the lion. He wasn't trusting in himself. The Lord delivered me from these things. And this will just be one more in a long line of unbelievable conquests that I've had. Imagine if you met somebody. You met somebody and they're like, I'm a hunter. And you think, what, like duck or squirrel? Or, no, I hunt lion. Oh, well, that's different. They attack back, don't they? Yeah, they can get you if you're not careful. Imagine you met someone that was a lion hunter or a bear hunter, kind of dangerous. And they told you the stories of their conquests and how these beasts turned on them and they vanquished their foes. You'd probably be impressed. Imagine how much more impressed you'd be if they said, yeah, I hunt lions, but I don't use guns. Yeah, bears, the ones I've killed have been with my bare hands. Or a stick, right? A shepherd's stick, right? My hands or a stick. Would you be more impressed? I don't think I would forget that encounter. I don't think I would forget meeting someone like that. Friends, my point here this morning is that David had been tested so that when that time came, that he needed to be, and he had to be ready to slay the giant, he'd be ready. I'm sure it wasn't fun for David to take off and chase after a lion. At one point, the adrenaline kicks in, but at one point, don't you at least go a little bit like, this seems like a bad idea? Bear, same thing, right? But God had tested David with the lion and with the bear. I want to ask you this morning, what are you going through? Maybe it's a trial. Maybe it's something that just happens because we live on this fallen earth, and for now God is allowing it to happen. By the way, God answers prayer. My default is to pray that God immediately deliver me and save me from this thing without any effort from me. That's my favorite. How many of you know? Does that happen? It does happen sometimes. Yeah, it does happen. It does happen. Sometimes God, like there was a time in Bible school where somebody said, God is not going to help you. What? This is Bible school. You're telling me Bible school's doing it. You're telling me God's not going to help me? No, you have to do this horrible, difficult, terrible thing. You have to do it, and God's not going to help you. He wants you to do it. And I prayed about it, and God removed everything. Like Moses and the Red Sea. I just danced across the thing, and no problem. That's my favorite. That does happen. God answers prayer like that. But not always. Sometimes God will not only allow you to go through something, sometimes he will initiate it. Sometimes he will send the storm. He'll send the lion. He'll send the bear so that you're ready when Goliath shows up. God needs some giant killers today.
Yes.
And you don't become a giant killer on accident. You don't become a giant killer by just being willing at the right time. A giant killer doesn't appear from nowhere. A giant killer is developed. A giant killer is trained. A giant killer is hardened. A giant killer has experienced some hardship. And rather than being fragile or merely resilient, a giant killer becomes stronger when they experience hardship and trials and testing. You are tougher than you think. Whatever you might be going through today, I will pray with you that you are delivered out of it, that it's over today. That's my favorite. But God may have something for you to do.
That's right.
And you might need to experience or have a revelation of being anti-fragile so that you'll be ready when that time comes. Just quickly, a couple verses quickly. I don't have time to expand on these or expound on these. Genesis 50:20, that's a favorite of a great many. Joseph said, after being sold into slavery by his brothers, he told his brothers later, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers, and through a series of circumstances too complicated to explain this morning, he rose to a prominent position and was able to save lives. As a result of where God had used him, or where God had placed him. And Joseph almost says that too, right? Like, you intended this to be bad, but God knew what he was doing when he allowed it to happen. Paul said in Romans 8:18, I consider our present sufferings, what are you suffering? What are you going through right now? Are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. David, it's okay with the lion. No, it's terrible. It's awful. I don't like this. It's okay. God's preparing you. Then the bear comes. I've got some experience. Still not fun. But God builds upon his experiences and what David had done and trusted and walked with the Lord in. All right, I have a story. I don't know if I have time to tell it. Let's see. Ooh, that's bad. All right, I know you say do it. You're just so nice. You're so Christian. All right, so I don't know how I can condense this. I'll try to condense it. So I went to the gym a while back. No, I wasn't working out. The steam room. I was in the steam room to loosen up those tight muscles and joints from laying around. Like, I didn't go to work out. I went to, true story. And I don't know if anybody likes the steam room, but everybody can take it more than I can. Like, I go in there and I'm like, ooh, let's get this hot. Let's crank it up. And then like 3 minutes later, I'm like, this is awful. I can't take it. I can't even explain what it is, but it's too much. And so then I go out. And then your invisible audience. You know the invisible audience? You don't know this. It's the people that you think are watching you that aren't watching you. So you're like, people are paying attention how long I can take the steam room, right? I'm a grown man. And I'm like, I don't want to leave the steam room because people are paying attention. Like, didn't he just go in there? What a baby. He just went in there. So I'm in there one day, and I'm trying to tough it out. And I'm like, you've never passed out in here before. Probably won't pass out this time. But I could hear a lot of noise outside. And so I go out. I'm cutting out some of the greatest details of this story. But I go out, and I see there's a child and a swim instructor trying to teach this child how to swim. I don't think this kid had ever seen water before. This kid was screaming, not like a whimpering or a complaining. This was blood-curdling, terrifying, reverberating around the giant open, pool area. There was no. He took it to its highest level. He couldn't go. There was no headroom for him to crank it up a notch. He was there. And so as swim instructor is kind of bringing him down along the pool, mom is walking along the side of the pool with swim instructor and kid who's screaming. And it didn't bother me, I'm a parent, I know, I understand what's happening, it doesn't bother me, but I decided I would try to go back in the steam room, and I thought, well, if I come out right away now, maybe I'll make them self-conscious, invisible audience, they're not paying attention to me. I'm like, I need to stay in here, because maybe they'll think, I'm coming out to watch this. The kid was making quite a scene, and I couldn't take it. I tried to stay in there a long time, and I came back out. The screaming continues, right? It has been nonstop for the whole 30 seconds I've been in the steam room, and no signs of letting up. And I couldn't, but as a dad, I'm sympathetic to what mom is going through, and she's going along, and although she can't be heard over the screaming, she's like, it's okay. You're doing good. You got this, buddy. And he was probably, I don't know if he knew profanity, but he probably made up some of his own. He wasn't like, okay, thanks, Mom. It feels great to have you nearby. But she continued to encourage. Now, parents in the play, I'll ask it doesn't have to be a parent. Anybody know what the mom was experiencing? Most likely on the inside. I'm just some stupid guy who can't tolerate a steam room, and I'm sympathetic to this little kid, right? Mom was probably dying on the inside. The guys are looking at me like, what? And the moms are like, yes. It was excruciating, but mom held the course. She stayed true. This went on for a long time. And kids screaming, and mom's walking along. It's okay, you got this, buddy. You're doing great. But on the inside, I'm sure it was raging turmoil. But I understood what she was doing, and I agreed with what she was doing. We can talk about parenting techniques later, I guess. But swimming is a valuable skill. 70% of the earth, water. Probably a good idea. Probably a good idea to know how to swim. That's a skill that will serve that child. Now, I don't know if he was too young, or, I'm not the swim expert. But mom knew or believed that this was a valuable skill, and he was going to learn it, whether he wanted to or not. I can sympathize with what mom may have been experiencing. And as I watched this, I thought, you know what? That's what our Heavenly Father is like. Yeah, he could deliver us out. He could rescue us from the pool. He could rescue us from the storm and the waves. He could deliver us out of that situation. All he had to do was say, or all she had to do is give the motion. And the swim instructor would have handed the child immediately back to mom. But she held her course. Although I assume she was dying on the inside, she knew that what that child was going through and what she was putting him through would benefit him for the rest of his life. And I thought, God allows us to go through some things. He might hand us off to the swim instructor. No offense to swim instructors, it's just this one story. Or hand us off to whatever the calamity or the tragedy or the trial is. But you know what? That kid wasn't fragile. And the kid's not even resilient. The kid is anti-fragile, just like you and I. And that kid will be better off having experienced that. And I believe as we go through our trials and as we go through our tests, and even if God doesn't deliver us out of it, he's saying, hey, good job. You got this. I believe in you. It sounds weird to say it that way, God, not, you know how I mean that. I know you can do this. I know you have the strength to accomplish this. I know you will endure. And you might be mad at me right now, but you're going to be better off as a result of this. I'm right here. I'm watching you. I'm nearby, and it's going to be okay. Let's go to the Lord in prayer this morning. Heavenly Father, I just want to pray for those that are experiencing a trial or a difficulty. Sometimes I pray this and I just think, people go through things. There's got to be some people going through some stuff. And I began to think of people that I know that are going through some extraordinarily difficult times right now. And so when I pray this, it's not just, well, this seems like a good way to close the service. There are some people within our church family here that are going through some insanely difficult times. I can't put words in their mouth, but I imagine if I asked them the question, they might say, yeah, this is the toughest thing I've ever gone through in my entire life. Lord, I just pray that if there's nothing for them in this, that you just deliver them. You are a miracle-working God, and you can just set them free and deliver them. I know that you do that. I've experienced it, and I'm grateful for those times. But Lord, I also know that sometimes you, in your great wisdom, know that we have to go through something, that we must experience some things, and that you've prepared some Goliath that we need to whoop somewhere down the road. Somewhere in our future, there's a Goliath. And if we aren't properly prepared, we won't be ready when that day comes and we come face to face with that giant. So Lord, I pray that you would strengthen, encourage those in this place that must go through and must walk through these tests and these lions and these bears as you create and form in them a giant killer and a giant killing attitude. Lord, I pray that they not lose the faith. They cling to you. David said, God got me through before, he'll get me through this. Lord, I pray that those that are experiencing hardship would remember what David did and the lessons that we learn from the test that you prepared for him in advance. Lord God, we worship you for that. We thank you. We praise you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right.